Welcome everyone to the Transgender Rights webinar, Legal Landscape and How Doctors Can Be an Ally. I'm Ayesha Rahman, and I'm being joined by my co-moderator, Lauren Gray, and our special guest speaker, Shannon Minter. This webinar is being hosted by Pride Ortho. This is the first of several webinars that we will be hosting for Pride Month, although we do these webinars throughout the year, not just for Pride. Pride Ortho is the first ever LGBTQA orthopedic group. Our president and several founding board members are also joining us on this call tonight. Pride Ortho is dedicated to promoting LGBTQA equity in orthopedics in multiple facets of our profession, including education, outreach, mentorship, and professional support. Thank you to all of our members who are joining us tonight. I also want to thank members of the Ruth Jackson Orthopedic Society who are joining us. RJOS is the largest women in ortho group dedicated to promoting gender equity, so we welcome you as well. This event is generously being sponsored by DePuy. Our corporate sponsorship provides critical support to be able to carry out our mission. Laban, I just see you're on. I'm going to turn it over to you to share a few words from our sponsor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So good evening, everybody. My name is Laban Cook. I'm an area vice president with DePuy Synthes Joint Reconstruction, and I lead the D&I Council for our U.S. organization. And I was just had a conversation today with my cousin, who happens to be a very senior leader and happens to be an Asian female. And she was talking about the conversation she had with the guy she works with. And she said, we don't need allies, we need co-conspirators. And I really like that. And I think it's our goal to be co-conspirators with all of you, and especially during Pride Month, and especially in support and protection of our trans friends in the trans community. So in addition to my personal why, I'm also really motivated by our Johnson & Johnson credo. There are two lines that really stuck out for me tonight. One is the first sentence says, we believe our first responsibility is to the patients, doctors, and nurses, to mothers and fathers, and all others who use our products and services. And I can't think of a more worthwhile priority than the work you're doing and aligning with that. And then the second paragraph says we are responsible to our employees who work with us throughout the world. We must provide an inclusive work environment where each person must be considered as an individual. We must respect their diversity and dignity and recognize their merit. So again, I think this is a very well aligned values with our organizations. And look, I personally firmly believe now more than ever that we should be standing in solidarity with the trans community and offering our talents for good. And that's why I'm so proud of the work that Pride Ortho is doing, because it's just a great representation of the priority and the talents that you all have in service of this community. So thank you for allowing us to be part of it. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for your support tonight. So I'm now going to introduce our moderators and our guest speaker. So I'm Ayesha Rahman. I am a orthopedic hand surgeon and co-director of the Hand and Upper Extremities Service at New York Presbyterian Hospital in Queens. I'm also an assistant professor of orthopedics at Cornell and Columbia and a teaching attending for the HSS residency. So I am a board member at large for Pride Ortho. I identify as gay/lesbian. My pronouns are she, her, and I am happily married to my wife, who is joining us as co-moderator of the webinar tonight, Lauren Gray. Lauren has an extensive background in LGBTQ and gender equity movements. She is currently a senior vice president at Edelman, the largest PR firm in the world. She works with clients such as the United Nations Population Fund, which focuses on sexual and reproductive rights around the world, and in fact recently returned from a UN trip to Kazakhstan. She counsels clients on sensitive and complex LGBTQ issues as part of Edelman's Outfront Task Force. She has previously worked at the National Center for Lesbian Rights with Shannon, where they worked on transgender military ban filed by Shannon. She has also worked with clients such as Planned Parenthood Federation of America, the Ms. Foundation for Women, the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, and has worked with survivors of military sexual assault at Service Women's Action Network. Lauren has won numerous awards for her work and been recognized as one of the leading 30 LGBTQ PR professionals in the country and one of the leading 36 female PR professionals setting the gold standard in the industry. So thank you, Lauren, for joining us.
Thank you for that intro.
And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed guest speaker and our very dear friend, Shannon Minter. Where to even begin? I need to brag about Shannon for the next couple moments, because Shannon has been a behemoth in the LGBTQ civil rights movement for the past 30 years and has litigated several landmark cases. Shannon is the legal director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights, one of the nation's leading advocacy organizations. Shannon first gained national attention in 2001, representing a lesbian partner in a wrongful death case, which resulted in a landmark decision in California that extended tort claims to same-sex domestic partners. In 2003, he again gained national attention in a well-publicized case representing a transgender man who won joint custody of his children. In 2009, Shannon was the lead attorney for same-sex couples in a landmark case before the California Supreme Court to overturn Prop 8 with Kenneth Starr, yes, that Kenneth Starr, leading the opposition, a case which ultimately established marriage equality in California. We've all heard of this case, and yeah, that was Shannon Minter. In 2010, Minter was the lead attorney in a case before the US Supreme Court, which upheld student group policies prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And in 2018, Shannon sprang into action and filed the first lawsuit challenging former President Trump's now repealed transgender military ban. In 2015, he was invited by President Barack Obama to help establish several senior positions within the White House. Shannon has received numerous awards and recognitions. I literally cannot name all of them in a resume. It would just be like the whole page. She's won the Ford Foundation's Leadership Award, the Dan Bradley Award from the National Gay and Lesbian Bar Association, the Anderson Prize Foundation Award from the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, and the list just goes on and on and on. Shannon has received his JD from Cornell Law School, and he was also given an honorary degree from the City University of New York School of Law. He is on the board of Faith in America and the Transgender Law and Policy Institute, and previously served on the American Bar Association's Commission on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. He's originally from Texas, where he currently lives on a farm with his wife and numerous rescue animals. He is a legal sleuth by day and a Twitter influencer and animal whisperer by night. As we heard earlier, Shannon rescues abandoned animals and helps rehouse them across the country. And he posts his rescues to Twitter and currently has a following of, I think, over 40,000 people or something like that. One time, Shannon posted a picture of Lauren and Mai's rescue kitty to his Twitter, and our cat got more likes than I think either of us have ever gotten in any of our posts. So Shannon, it is an honor and a privilege to have someone of your caliber joining us tonight. I want to say thank you for your time, and also just thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do for the movement. Welcome, Shannon.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It's such an honor to be here with Dr. Rahman and my dear friend Lauren, who I always tell everyone is literally the absolute best communications professional I have ever worked with in my life. And that was a way too kind introduction. I will say most of them, I like how you say I rehouse them, because I usually end up rehousing them in my own home. So it's an aspiration to rehouse them outside. If anyone needs a kitten, I have a new one.
That's hilarious.
Well, we can jump in and get started. Thank you for those incredible bios and introductions. Ayesha, no one is more committed to detail than surgeons. That was impeccable. So well done. So I'd love to start the conversation, Shannon, by just talking a little bit about what your role at NCLR actually is. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? And how did you end up in this line of work?
Thank you. Yeah, no, well, I have been there for 30 years, which is quite a long time to be at the same place. I've hung around there so long, I think, because Lauren, as you know, we were colleagues. It is a very, it's an exciting place to work. Just kind of have a cultural, institutional culture, I guess you would say, of being very nimble and fast to respond to breaking new issues, or to, you know, we can see issues coming, and that's been just really challenging, and a lot of you know, fun, and at times a lot of pain too, dealing with the issues that face our community. But you know, I oversee our litigation and our policy work, and we work in all different areas. We do a lot of family law, we do immigration and asylum law, had one of the first programs in the country representing LGBTQ people seeking asylum, fleeing persecution in their home countries. We do a lot of transgender law. I'm transgender myself, and we, you know, we have always, even before I transitioned on the job, we're very committed to transgender equality. We have a big youth project, and yeah, so we just work across all kinds of issues.
Is there anything that you'd like to share from your personal story that led you to become more involved with the movement?
Yeah, and I love talking to medical providers, in part because, you know, being transgender, being able to get the medical care and support that I needed, you know, has been so transformative for me. I mean, I grew up, you know, in a rural part of Texas, the same part where I live now. I didn't have any idea what was going on with me. I knew I was different. I thought that maybe I was lesbian, you know, I was trying to figure things out, but I mean, it was a miserable experience. My parents had no idea. No, there was just no information, no support. Like so many people of my generation, I just struggled for the longest time. When I finally learned that there was such a thing as a transgender man, which I really embarrassingly didn't know until I was, you know, probably in my late 20s, early 30s, and was able to move to San Francisco to work for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And that was the first time I met other transgender men in real life. And I was just completely rocked my world. But because there's so much support, medical support for transgender people in the Bay Area, you know, I was able to go to a clinic. That was back when insurance didn't cover any transition-related care, and get the most compassionate, supportive treatment. And I cannot say, and it completely changed my life. Before that, it was a struggle for me just even to make eye contact with people. I felt so horrible and awkward and just like wrong. And then after that, I mean, I've had the most wonderful life. You know, I had a great career, married, have a child, a grown child now, a wonderful life. And I'm just so grateful to your profession. And I was lucky enough to just connect with NCLR when I was a law student. And once I knew about it, I was like, I want to come back to this place. And I was able to I got a fellowship to go back to NCLR. I was there, I worked there as an intern there as a student. And then I got a fellowship to actually start a legal program for kids who've gone through conversion therapy. And that's ended up, so that was 1993, 30 years ago. And that's ended up turning into, really honestly, y'all, just a national movement to stop conversion therapy. Our program to do that is called Born Perfect. We've got like 22 states now have passed laws protecting minors from conversion therapy. So anyhow, that's how I got my foot in the door there.
Shannon, can you give us like the 10,000-foot overview of LGBTQ rights? Because right now there's more than 500 anti-LGBTQ bills in state legislatures across the country. Like, can you talk a little bit about like what has shifted, what is driving this backlash? Where do we expect this conversation to go next? And what are like the biggest threats that are facing the transgender community today?
Yeah, boy, what a moment we're in. I mean, I try to remind myself, because the present moment does feel pretty dire. I try to remind myself that if you look at the bigger picture, the bigger trajectory of the last, 2 to 3 decades, I mean, we are still, notwithstanding the onslaught we're facing right now, we're still in so much of a better position than other LGBTQ people in this country have ever been. I mean, we have marriage equality. There are non-discrimination laws in about half the states. We have enormously strengthened federal protections that are like far beyond anything people could have imagined even like 10 years ago. There was a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court in 2020 called Bostock that established that LGBTQ people are fully protected under federal employment discrimination laws. So we now have national anti-discrimination protection in the employment arena. That also applies to schools and to housing, and theoretically to healthcare under the Affordable Care Act, although there's a lot of fighting about that in courts. And you just look at like, even with transgender issues, and transgender people are definitely like kind of the main ones in the crosshairs right now. It's still night and day. I mean, there's so much more acceptance and support and visibility. When Lauren was at NCLR, that's when we were fighting the transgender military ban. I think that was really transformative in itself It's just elevated the existence of transgender military service members to the whole country, and I think really changed the way the country saw transgender people. So there's a lot of good, but as you noted, Dr. Rahman, it is, yeah, what is going on? These past, like really in the past 3 years, it felt like it came out of nowhere. Tremendous backlash, just huge backlash against the progress we've made. A lot of it is focused on transgender youth, but there's a good bit that's focused on just the entire LGBT community, with laws that don't say gay laws in schools are horrifying. They're terrible. They're really having a very detrimental impact on the climate in our nation's schools, scaring the heck out of LGBTQ teachers, parents, students, really silencing people. We're seeing books being banned. And then so many laws targeted at trans kids. So, and as to why this is happening, I really wish I knew. I'm not sure. I mean, I think the folks, right wing, or I should say really the anti-LGBT forces and groups, I think they realized it would be hard to push back on gay people too directly right now. And, they lost the marriage equality battle. I think they do see transgender people as an opportunity for them, because most people in the country still don't know a transgender person. That's a big problem. There's recent polling that shows like something upwards of 70% of people do not know one single transgender person. So that's really hurting us. And as you all know, oh my gosh, there's so much misinformation about medical care for trans kids. Anyway, I'm not really sure what all accounts for the backlash, but we are certainly experiencing one.
Shannon, I know that you live in Texas right now and you grew up there. This is one of the places that we're seeing absolutely some of the most anti-LGBTQ opposition. Can you chat a little bit more about what you are seeing on the ground in Texas? And then also on that same note, Florida, which I know is another state in which we've just seen so much movement recently.
Yeah, it feels almost unreal to be saying these things, but they are happening. Yeah, Texas has done some of the worst things of any state so far. The very worst thing I think that any state has yet done was Texas. And our awful attorney general, who's now being impeached, Kim Paxton, just issued an order instructing the child welfare agency in Texas, they're supposed to investigate abused and neglected kids, to go after parents who support their transgender children. He unilaterally decreed that being supportive of a transgender child, allowing a child to transition, allowing a child to obtain medical treatment, puberty blockers or hormone therapy, is child abuse in Texas and a grounds to have your child taken away from you. And he unleashed the whole office, sent them out after families. It incited fear, panic. I mean, you can imagine. Thankfully, it was pretty quickly enjoined, even by conservative Texas courts, but that litigation is still pending. So that happened. And then Texas has also banned medical care for transgender kids. They banned transgender women from playing in college or university sports, all of which is terrible. They've passed a law banning certain forms of drag. In Florida, I think, has the honor now, the dubious honor of passing more anti-LGBT laws than any other state in the country. I mean, and not just anti-LGBT laws, but laws attacking people of color and women as well. Florida's literally outlawed gender studies as a major. You can't major. It's now against the law for a publicly funded university or college in Florida to have a gender studies program. They've outlawed all use of public funds for diversity and inclusion programs in their state schools. They passed an incredibly draconian, by far the most draconian don't say gay law that applies at every level, K through 12. They've banned medical care for kids and they put severely restricted care for adults. They passed laws prohibiting students in schools, from transgender students, from using restrooms that correspond to their gender identity. They actually passed a law that makes it a crime for any transgender person to use the appropriate restroom in a public building in Florida. And I'm sure I'm forgetting even more, but you get the picture. I mean, Florida is turning into an incredibly hostile environment, particularly for LGBT people and particularly for transgender people.
Shannon, I want to focus a little bit of the questions on the restrictions to healthcare. Those seem to be some of like the most distressing class of bills that we are seeing targeted towards transgender people. For us, from like a physician's perspective, we know gender affirming care is life-saving, everything from access to medications, surgeries, therapy. And we also know that, it's the gender dysphoria, just as a well-established, medical diagnosis. To us, it is just astounding that, in the medical field, there can be politicians that interfere with like individualized doctor-patient relationships in a way that clearly goes against the standard of care for treatment. Can you delve into a little bit more detail about some of these healthcare bills that you kind of touched on that are happening in Texas and Florida and other places, state and federal, the kinds of restrictions that they are imposing on doctors, transgender patients, and any, families of minors?
Yes, it's bad, you all. And it is shocking. And one thing I try to say to people is, no, including providers, no matter what anybody thinks about transgender people or this particular type of medical care, everyone should be highly alarmed by the government inserting itself in a way that has never happened before into the patient-doctor relationship. And this is really a wholesale attack on the healthcare system as we know it in our country, on all the professional organizations. Got all these states in court openly attacking the AMA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Associations, all these professional organizations, and accusing them of being like conspiracy theories, accusing them of not following science, of elevating ideology over science. I mean, this is really about a direct attack on the credibility of medical science and the medical professionals. But what's happening is we are now up to 22 states, and that happened so quickly. That happened in 2 years. 22 states have banned all medical care for transgender minors. No puberty blockers, no hormone therapy. In some states, it is a crime. Some states have made it a crime for a provider to prescribe or administer those medications to transgender minors. Some states, it's just grounds for being professionally disciplined. These are scary, extreme laws. We're having a heck of a time keeping up with the number of them. So we've only thus far been able to challenge about half of those. There's about 10 challenges pending. The good news, though, is that so far, every court that has been presented with a challenge to these laws has enjoined them, has stopped them from going into effect, and come to the conclusion that they're unconstitutional and they're just not backed up. As you all know, they're just not backed up by any medical evidence or science. I mean, on the one side, you have this like enormous consensus. Like you said, Dr. Rahman, gender dysphoria and its, prior gender identity disorder have been around for like 40 years. Treatments for children have been around for 20 plus years. There's a very substantial body of research that shows that children benefit enormously from receiving these treatments. I mean, they dramatically reduce gender dysphoria, the distress associated with gender dysphoria, or that defines gender dysphoria, and they also dramatically reduce a lot of associated, comorbidities of anxiety, depression, suicidality, very dramatic reduction in suicidality. And then just to put it more positively, there's recent studies, kind of longitudinal studies that show that kids who get this treatment early on and don't have to suffer through years of untreated gender dysphoria, they're practically indistinguishable from other kids, from non-transgender kids in terms of their mental health. I mean, that is astonishing, and it's wonderful. I mean, these kids can just basically be normal, happy, healthy kids if they're given, treatment early on. And to think that this is now being literally criminalized, made a felony crime in some states to provide these kids with this care, it's pretty staggering situation.
You touched on this point that there's just this difference between accessing care for minors versus adults. On like a personal level, what does this look like for some of the transgender families that you may have worked with or represent? What are they having to do to get care? Like, do they have to go outside of the state? Do they have to seek sort of care sort of outside of the usual medical route? Like how is this affecting, the kids?
Yes, it is imposing such pain and suffering on these families and the kids. Lots of families honestly, just about anyone who can possibly afford to do it is moving out of these states that ban the care. There are some families who can't afford to move, and they're literally just sending their children to go live with other relatives or friends outside of their state. There are families who are driving 6 and 7 hours out of state to go to, if there is a neighboring state that is not banning the care, to get the care in neighboring states. But what we're starting to see, we're seeing it, is there's a huge wait list now everywhere. Like these neighboring states, you all probably know, there's already the demand for these services is much greater than the existing resources, clinics and providers already. And so when you take that situation and then have it banned, the care banned in like half the country, and families have to go to other states to get the care, they're on like incredibly long waiting lists. I mean, one thing that's just happening is kids are just not getting the care they need. They're just not getting it, and they're suffering. As what happens with untreated gender dysphoria. And as you all know very well, with this medical condition in particular, the timing of the care is so critical, because if you don't get puberty blockers somewhere pretty near the beginning of puberty, you're going to go through the process of acquiring irreversible secondary sex characteristics that exacerbate that person's gender dysphoria, and that can only, some of which just never going to be undone later, some of which could be undone through surgeries that the person would otherwise not have to go through, and just the mental anguish and suffering and the toll that takes, lifelong toll on people's health and well-being. So yeah, it's causing just sheer misery.
Yeah, wow. I'm going to transition to another topic. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sports bans. And this topic is, pertinent to our group, since many of us do work closely with athletes, and many of us that go into this field, we, are current or former competitive athletes. We had sent Shannon earlier, like a controversial opinion / column piece that was published in Core. It's a well-regarded orthopedic journal that argued that trans feminine athletes should just be outright banned from competing in the women's category of sports. And these sorts of bans that I also touched on earlier in Texas, they just seem to kind of keep coming. Like, what trends are you seeing right now in this country regarding sports bans in schools, colleges, and elite sports? And what's being kind of done about these?
Yes, the backlash on this issue is actually even more intense than the medical backlash. It's been interesting seeing what's happening from the perspective of someone who's been working on these sports issues for a long time. Just NCLR got involved in trying to formulate good policies on transgender athletes in sports a long time ago, 2010, we started working with the NCAA to try to help them develop a good policy that, looking at the medical science, considering fairness, all the issues, the barriers that girls and women already face in athletics. And we did, we helped the NCAA come up with what I thought was an excellent policy that allowed transgender women to compete at, it's an elite level. NCAA competitions are by definition elite competition, allow them to compete with appropriate medical care to mitigate any advantages that might arise as a result of having gone through male puberty. So you have to be on hormone therapy for at least a year. There's not a huge amount of research on this. We need a whole lot more, but there's, the research that exists does tend to show that being on hormone therapy does significantly mitigate, the increased muscle mass and strength that a person gains as a result of going through male puberty. So anyway, but the thing is, it just wasn't a big deal. Like, no one was talking about it. The NCAA could just sort of peacefully look at all the data and bring together all the stakeholders. They developed a policy. It was in place really with very successfully without a lot of for a good 10 years. And then, and at the same time, all these high school athletic associations all over the country were adopting really good policies that allow kids to play based on their gender identity. A lot of big recreational leagues like US Soccer, which is the largest recreational sports association in the world, adopted a great policy way the heck back, like sometime around the 2015, around there. That was because of Jazz Jennings, NCLR. Before she was famous, we represented Jazz when she was just a little 9-year-old kid who wanted to play soccer, and that led to the US Soccer changing its policy. But the point I'm trying to make is this was all happening very steadily, amazing progress, everything was going great. And it was just fine. But then it was like all of a sudden this issue became weaponized. And boy, when that happened, it just exploded. And so all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, there's now more than 25 states have completely banned transgender girls from playing on girls' teams K through 12. The NCAA, under enormous pressure, and I'm so sad they did this. I wish they hadn't, but they cracked under pressure. They abandoned their policy and just punted and said that they were going to leave it up to the governing boards of different sports to adopt their own policy about transgender athletes participating. Unfortunately, what we've seen after that is that several of those governing bodies have adopted either outright bans, like World Rugby, completely banned. If you're assigned male at birth, doesn't matter how much medical treatment you've had, doesn't matter if you went on puberty blockers and never went through male puberty, trans women cannot play under the current rules of world soccer. Swimming has adopted a very draconian policy. They will allow girls who were on puberty blockers and didn't go through male puberty to play, but no one else, which is overly restrictive, so the trend is horrible, it's awful. And we've all seen the demonization of individual transgender girls and women in the popular press. I mean, some of these girls particularly have been destroyed. Their lives have actually been destroyed. I mean, there was a couple of girls in California recently. They were okay. They were trans girls. They had limited success. They were not the greatest athletes. They were runners. They weren't doing great, but they were doing, they were winning a little bit. And the national press just turned its spotlight on them. And we've spoken to their families. Their families are just crushed. These girls they're never going to be the same. I mean, if you can imagine that's such a vulnerable age, and having the entire country looking at you, criticizing you, saying that you're doing something horrible just by being yourself and participating in a sport. Like, our country has lost its moral bearings on this level, and the harm that is being inflicted on individual transgender girls and women when they happen to get into the national spotlight is really just unconscionable. And as you know, Dr. Rahman, I thought response piece. I don't know if it's out yet, but it was so well done, and you just kind of march through. This is not supported by science, and it's certainly not compatible with even the most elementary principles of compassion for human dignity and respect for others.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a Title IX question in just a second here, but hearing you talk about this, it feels like the dialogue has shifted somewhere around 2016 or so, where it's kind of like the pendulum swang back, where it's okay to openly discriminate now, and people need their boogeyman is kind of what it feels like when there's nothing else to focus on. We already have marriage equality, we already have these things. It's who's the next boogeyman to sort of rile up the social vote or something like that, and it is that, are you sort of seeing sort of that become part of like the conversation of why these sorts of bans? I mean, we're kind of like losing our humanity a little bit with seeing these. They've taken away the humanity of it and just kind of turned it into these like straight issues. I've heard it's being used almost as a political tool to either suck up resources, so they'll focus on this and then we'll get this other thing passed, or just to rile up a conservative base on social issues and not these other major issues. Is this does it ever seem like this is being used as a political tool, these bans?
Oh, undoubtedly, that is a very big part of what's going on. There's no question about it. All these many state legislators have discovered that this is a ticket for visibility for them, and that they can promote these, and they're really competing with each other to see who can come up with the most punitive and draconian laws. And Governor DeSantis in Florida is trying to make a name for himself as being the most extreme on this level, because I think he thinks it will help him in his presidential aspirations. It's definitely become politicized. And as Lauren knows, I have a habit, maybe a bad one, of monitoring sort of conservative podcasts and authors and all that. I tell you what, I have been terrified in the last year to see how quickly the rhetoric, anti-transgender rhetoric, has escalated. I mean, it used to be that people would take pot shots, but they were actually somewhat respectful, somewhat. They'd be like, well, if it's somebody in my family or a friend, I'll use the right pronouns, just out of politeness. And any kind of humanity or compassion is long gone. And now the rhetoric has escalated to calling transgender people and transgenderism, as they love to call it, satanic, demonic. I mean, they're really in part of this resurgence of this old rhetoric, very dangerous rhetoric, accusing LGBT people of being groomers and child predators. And I mean, when you say that kind of thing about a group of people, you are inviting violence against them. I mean, that's the purpose of saying that a group of people is threatening to children or preying on children, grooming children. I mean, it's designed to elicit outrage, anger, and violence. And I'm very, very worried. And as a transgender person living in Texas, personally afraid. And I know that transgender people all over the country are experiencing a new level of fear that just has not been present until quite recently. I mean, things have gotten very, very ugly. The specter of violence feels very serious and real.
On that safety note, could you briefly explain to us what is Title IX, and then the changes that are being proposed by President Biden's administration to protect transgender women and athletes?
Yeah, Title IX is federal law that prohibits sex discrimination in schools, and it's like the primary law. It was passed in 1972, and it has been so great. especially for women's sports, girls and women's sports. It's because of Title IX that schools have to provide equal athletic opportunities for girls and young women. So it's been a wonderful, powerful, it's a great law, and it's transformed, the whole landscape for girls and women and made them able to be athletes and to play sports. So Title IX is also the law that would and should and does protect transgender students, because discrimination because of a person's transgender status is a kind of sex discrimination. The Supreme Court has held that now. And it makes sense if you're discriminating against someone because they were born one sex and now they're the other sex. It's obviously a sex-based characteristic. It's all about a person's sex and gender. So that makes sense. But it's a pretty sticky question, or complex question about, well, what does that mean exactly? Like, how do we apply that anti-discrimination principle to transgender girls and women who want to play in women's sports? And so I think that the Department of Education has come out with a proposed standard for how to assess that I think is really terrific. I mean, at one extreme, you could, one extreme position would be to just say that, well, transgender girls and women should always just get to play on women's teams. That's not an unreasonable position, and there's good arguments for that position. The other extreme, of course, is they should never get to play on girls and women's teams. I personally think, and this is the path that this proposed rule set out, that something in between those two is the right way to look at this issue. So I think the presumption should be that, yes, heavy presumption that as a general rule, a transgender girl or woman should get to play on a women's team. And that if you're going to have any restrictions on that, like any requirements, any medical requirements, it has to meet a very high standard. It has to be the legal jargon is, has to be substantially related to an important governmental interest. That's just the legal test, but that's basically a very high standard under the law. So it comes down to, you have to have a pretty darn good reason, justification for imposing any medical requirement. And I think the only place you could really justify that would be in elite sports. I think for elite competitions, having some medical requirements like a hormone therapy requirement is perfectly reasonable. And maybe for some elite high school sports, possibly. But like underneath that, it would be really hard, I think, to justify medical requirements. So I think it's a really good rule. It's still in the comment stage. They're supposed to put out a final rule in October, but I hope that it will help. It will definitely help us in the legal battle to challenge these sports bans. And I hope that it helps diffuse some of the political divisiveness around this issue, because it is a little bit of a, I think, reasonable middle way.
Thank you. Shannon, there are so many legislative attacks happening right now. I'm so curious about what are some of the key topics that you really think we should be reading and following very closely in this moment?
Well, please keep your eye on these state bans. And also, you all are all doctors, other types of healthcare professionals. Our best defense in this battle, both legally and politically and in the court of public opinion, is support from medical professionals. Every time anyone does a survey about the most respected, trusted voices in this country are pediatricians, other healthcare providers, other doctors, nurses, also very well respected by the public. So by definition, if you're part of this group, your voice has a lot of credibility and power. So I hope people will pay attention to whatever professional organizations you belong to. They're all of the leading medical organizations and mental health organizations in the country have been terrific in this struggle. They're filing amicus briefs for us. They put out very strong statements condemning these medical bans. The American Medical Association just yesterday issued a new, even stronger statement of support for medically needed care for transgender young people and condemning the medical bans. And I'll just say about that, I mean, Lauren, you're the communications expert, but the thing that helps the most is that y'all are experts. I mean, you speak from a place of genuine knowledge and expertise, like, and that's what carries so much weight. You know, that's why people trust doctors and professional, healthcare professionals, because they know that you go through so years of study, that you're gaining knowledge and experience every day through your clinical practice, and that people go into that profession, but it's very powerful for me personally and just for what it means for my community, because you care about people. You really care about people. And that is known. So, know it, whether y'all know it or not, you're probably literally the most powerful people in terms of helping us reach the public and stop legislatures from passing these laws.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, many of us that are on the call tonight, we're here because we wanted to learn from you. We wanted to answer the call to action. We just needed to be sort of pointed in the right direction and kind of given our marching orders. So thank you, for sharing all of that with us. So it's now 8:48 /5:48 where I'm at. So why don't we use the last 10 minutes? We're going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. I'm going to open up the chat here. So if anybody has any questions, you can either go ahead and put them into the chat, and I'll go ahead and read them out. And in the meantime, I'm going to start it off. I'm actually going to call on somebody real quick. Ashley, you're on. I think Ashley had a question.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ashley Rogerson. I'm another Pride Ortho board member with Ayesha. So first of all, I have kind of two questions, I guess. First is, how do you do this every day? How do you kind of wake up and face it? Like, I'm between jobs right now, so I have a lot more free time to like read the news. And it's just like, I've stopped doing it in the morning because it just puts me in such a bad headspace. So I can't imagine just being like surrounded by all this kind of hate every day. So that's my first, like, how do you keep fighting the fight? And the second is just, it kind of goes along with the first question. All the backlash against like big corporations, like Target and Bud Light and stuff, when you do show, support of the LGBTQ, particularly trans community, they get all this backlash and then their sales drop. And, what have you seen in the corporate world, on that side of things too? So, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it can get kind of rough just day in, day out. But, I work with just amazing people. Like, I will tell y'all something. You would not believe how dedicated the medical experts that we work with are. I mean, I have been on the phone today probably 10 times with one of our experts, and we're challenging Kentucky's medical ban on care for transgender kids. And, we work with, all wonderful experts. This guy, Dan Schumer, he's a pediatric endocrinologist. He's so busy. Y'all all are. I know what your schedules are like. They're brutal. And he has made time to answer all of my questions. He's an expert for us in like six different cases now. And he's one of a, group of probably 12 to 15 experts on this issue who are just, making this a priority and putting themselves through, hell, honestly, to help us fight these laws. And just the opportunity to work with people like that does keep me going. And, I see the parents and the kids, and you just look at them and you're like, okay, there's just no choice. We do have to keep this going. Yeah, the corporate stuff we've had some bad experiences in that arena lately. Missteps, I think, more than anything, just missteps. I'm hopeful that the support, that the long time solid support we've had from the business world will hold up, and we won't lose that. But I do think we're at a little bit of a critical juncture there, and we shouldn't be taking that world for granted. I mean, we do need to shore up support among businesses and corporations, and if that's another place, honestly, where if you all have any connections, it'd be a good. The medical world and the business world are probably our two most important sources of kind of, institutional social support. So you're right. You're very smart and right to flag that.
I always thought that was like my safety net, or like I kind of like took that for granted, I guess. Like all the corporations, even as performative as you might think it is during June, it's like, all right, well, they're all on our side. Like nothing can, but now like you got Bud Light, you got Target, you got all these, and they're all kind of like folding a little bit and walking it back. The support, that made me like very nervous this summer, or these last couple of weeks when that was all kind of unfolding, and just to see people that you thought were just on a more personal level, you thought were more kind of open-minded and stuff, and that's just like everyone's kind of shutting down a little bit and shying away. It's easy to be an ally when that's where the momentum's going, but now that there's backlash, you see people kind of protecting themselves, or just kind of shying away from everything. So that has been kind of disturbing for me the last couple of months.
Me too. It's unnerving. Yeah, I know. And I think we should, Lauren, again, you're the expert on this. I think one thing we should do is just remember to thank the businesses that are supporting us, try to organize thanks and gratitude, and let's all go shop at Target or whatever the place may be. I think they need to see that positive reinforcement. Sometimes I fear that if they're getting yelled at by both sides, so to speak, their tendency is to retreat. But I don't know, Lauren, is that right?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that. So at Edelman, I'm part of what's called our Outfront Task Force, which is a group of individuals across specialties that advise Fortune 500 companies on complex LGBTQ issues. And I will say that leading up to Pride, this has been sort of a few months that's unlike any that I've ever seen before. So the kinds of questions that we're getting from companies in this moment are just, it's just such a look backward. I mean, very simple things like, are we safe to change our company logo to something rainbow? Which, as you can imagine, is sort of like the very lowest level of engagement on LGBTQ issues, something we would have seen, a decade ago or so. And interestingly, something that the community often criticizes as being sort of like very, very minimal engagement. But one interesting thing is that we did partner with GLAAD recently on some data that looks at the impact of LGBTQ issues and support on brands and companies. And consumers are twice as likely to buy a brand that supports LGBTQ issues. And employees are 4.5 times more likely to want to work for an employer that supports LGBTQ issues. So really there is tremendous incentives, business incentives for companies to continue to engage and to stand up. So I think in the wake of some of these issues over the last few months, we have to really hope and counsel and make sure that companies are not learning the wrong lessons in response to some of this opposition.
Thank you. Ezra has a great question. Ezra, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'll just read what I wrote you. Shannon, thank you so much for talking with us. This has been incredibly informative. I was just wondering if there's any way that we can, like we as physicians or just as people, can kind of push back a bit against the anti-trans legislation, like above and beyond just like writing letters or calling politicians. Like I've done that and it almost feels like I'm just yelling into a void. Or is there any way we can like support like the ACLU or any of those kinds of organizations, or like people who are actually like showing up to court and like fighting these like court cases?
Well, you are not shouting into the void. I'll tell you, it may not feel like important. There's nothing more important than doing that, to contact your individual state legislators and federal legislators. I forgot to mention that there's pending federal legislation that would be like the transition healthcare analog to the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits any federal funding of abortion. So this federal bill law, if it passed, would prohibit any federal funding of transition-related care. It would be devastating. Like, we need all of y'all to speak out against that. So that, I just don't want you to undersell the importance of just that individual reaching out saying, you know, I am Dr. So-and-so, I live in your, you know, district. I do not support this. What are you doing? This is terrible. And look, writing op-eds is incredibly powerful. I'm telling you, people listen to doctors more than anyone else. Write op-eds. But if you want to do, the next step would be to get, you know, together to do like letters, you know, organized letters with a bunch of doctors on them, or statements from doctors. That's very powerful. I wish all of y'all would actually think about joining the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, even if it's not your area of expertise, because it's a way to support them, but also they alert members to pending legislation, bad bills that are coming down the pike, and other like opportunities, I think, to speak out collectively as healthcare professionals when those opportunities arise. And in terms of court, you know, I mean, we use medical experts. These cases entirely depend upon medical experts. I'll tell you something though. Honestly, every single transgender related legal case I have ever been involved in, we have relied heavily on medical experts. Every single one. I think the first one one of the first I ever was involved in, was the Brandon Tina case. Brandon Tina was a transgender man living in Nebraska who was brutally murdered after some young men that he was friends with supposedly discovered that he was transgender, and they just killed him. They murdered him. And I did an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief in that case on behalf of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, just explaining transgender identity and what it was and what his experience would have been. So, I mean, just the medical and the legal folks have been just like hand in glove on every single victory for transgender people in the courts, and honestly in the legislature too. So, I mean, you all are seriously co-equal voices and partners with the lawyers on advocating for transgender people. You know, if it wasn't for Harry Benjamin back in the day, and for all the other doctors and providers who have listened to transgender people and recognized this is a real medical condition, and recognized that we need care and that it benefits us, and then you explain that to policymakers, I mean, we would not be where we are right now. So thank you for asking the question, Ezra. And I hope that you will find, all of you will find some way to meet this moment. This is pretty much of a crisis, really. This is what's happening with the attack on healthcare for transgender people in the country right now is a crisis. It's focused on youth now, but it's moving towards adults. And we've got to stop that. We really have to stop that in its tracks.
Thank you, Shannon. Are there any more questions in the audience? Q.
Actually, Ezra asked the question I originally wanted to ask, but I wanted to take a moment to say, Ayesha, what a wonderfully done discussion. Thank you so much, Shannon and Lauren. I'm hoping we do more and more of these and kind of continue work and discussion. So thank you all.
Thank you. All right, and I think that's time. It's 9:01. If there's no other questions, again, I want to say also thank you, Shannon, for your time and for all of the work that you do, and for educating all of us. And I think we're all pretty kind of like riled up and like ready to go out there and like, you know, fight the fight with you. So again, thank you so much for everything that you do. Thank you everybody for joining us, and have a good night.
Thank you all so much. This is great. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.